The tremor in the eastern wing was barely perceptible, a vibration of ancient stone that most creatures would have dismissed as the settling of old foundations. But at 3:17 a.m., Damien Salvatore heard it with the clarity of a predator who had spent 4 centuries cataloging every sound his gothic fortress made. He sat in the high-backed velvet chair of his library, surrounded by leather-bound journals whose pages predated the American Revolution, a crystal glass of untouched wine catching the amber glow of candlelight. The rest of Boston might have been sleeping beneath the autumn fog that rolled in from the harbor, but Damien was lost in the anatomy of memory reading his sister's handwriting from 1723, the year before the Covenant hunters burned her alive. The tremor came again, not from the stone this time, but from the kitchen. A soft, rhythmic disturbance in the air, the displacement of objects, the whisper of fabric against marble, the unmistakable percussion of a human heartbeat where no human heartbeat should exist. Damien's hand stilled on the yellowed page. The staff had been dismissed at midnight. His ghoul chef, Gregor, always left precisely at the stroke of 12, sealing the blood-infused meals in silver containers before vanishing into whatever crypt he called home. The housekeepers, the groundskeeper, the rotating roster of humans who maintained his estate, they all operated on an iron schedule designed to ensure Damien never had to acknowledge the living machinery that sustained his isolation. Invisibility was the contract. Silence after dark was the covenant. But someone had broken it. He closed the journal with deliberate care, his movements possessing the liquid grace of something that had stopped being entirely human long ago. Rising from the chair, Damien moved through the shadowed hallway, his bare feet making no sound on the cold marble. The mansion sprawled around him like a sleeping beast, all Gothic arches, stained glass windows depicting biblical massacres, and the oppressive weight of centuries. He had purchased Salvatore Hall in 1847, back when Boston's elite still believed in ghosts and didn't ask questions about reclusive European nobility. Now, it stood on 30 acres of isolated woodland, hidden behind iron gates, and the kind of old money that bought indifference. He descended the curved staircase, each step measured, controlled. The great hall below was bathed in darkness, but his eyes, pupils blown wide and rimmed with silver, cut through the gloom as easily as a knife through silk. He could see everything. The dust motes suspended in air, the faint residue of fingerprints on the banister, the dying embers in the massive stone fireplace, and he could see the light. A single flame candlelight, not electric, burning in the kitchen. It cast a warm, golden circle against the shadows, entirely at odds with the cold sterility of his modern appliances and pristine countertops. Someone was using his kitchen. Someone was touching his things. Someone was violating his sanctuary with the audacity of breath and blood and beating heart. Damien reached the base of the stairs and moved along the wall, keeping to the periphery where darkness pooled thickest. His senses sharpened, extending outward like invisible tendrils. He tasted the air, cataloging scents. Lavender soap, female sweat, fear, sharp and acrid, and underneath it all, something else, something that made his dead heart clench with a recognition he didn't want to name. He reached the archway that opened into the kitchen and stopped. There was a woman standing at the central island, her back to him. She wore the simple dove-gray uniform of his day staff, modest collar, sensible hem, the kind of outfit designed to render its wearer forgettable. But Damien recognized her immediately. Michelle Biden, age 32, hired 4 months ago to replace the previous housekeeper who'd retired to Florida. Background check clean except for significant medical debt and a deceased husband whose death certificate listed vehicular accident, with a coroner's signature Damien now suspected was forged. He knew these details because he made it his business to know everything about the humans who entered his domain. Michelle Biden was a single mother, worked 3 jobs, never made eye contact, and cleaned with the kind of desperate thoroughness that suggested she couldn't afford to lose this position. But she wasn't cleaning now. Michelle was hunched over the island, her blonde hair usually pinned in a severe bun falling in loose, exhausted waves around her face. Her hands trembled as they worked, but her movements were practiced, efficient. In front of her sat one of Gregor's serving dishes, an ornate silver platter that had held tonight's meal. Damien vaguely remembered its seared venison in a dark reduction sauce, root vegetables roasted in rendered fat, everything infused with the subtle metallic tang that marked food prepared for vampiric consumption. Gregor didn't just cook, he alchemized. Every meal was a ritual, each ingredient carefully selected and then blessed or cursed, depending on perspective, with drops of Damien's own blood. It was an old practice, dating back to when vampires had households of human servants who needed protection from rival covens. The blood in the food created a connection, a ward, a subtle marking that said, "This human is claimed." But Gregor's meals were meant to be eaten or disposed of, never stolen. Michelle held a plastic container in her shaking hands, a cheap, clouded thing that had seen better years, its lid cracked and mended with tape. With a spatula that looked like it belonged in a college dorm kitchen, she was transferring portions of the venison into the container. Not large portions, careful, measured amounts, like someone rationing medicine. She scraped the dark sauce from the bottom of the platter with the reverence of an acolyte collecting holy oil, drizzling it over the meat with such focused intensity that Damien felt like an intruder witnessing a sacred rite. She wasn't being greedy. She was being precise. He watched, frozen in the shadows, as she paused to examine a piece of fat that clung to the edge of the platter. Her hand hovered over it, hesitating. Then, with a quick, furtive motion, the gesture of someone who had learned to take what she needed when no one was watching, she plucked it up and placed it on her tongue. She closed her eyes. The expression that crossed her face in that moment was almost painful to witness. Relief. Desperation. The look of someone tasting salvation, however temporary. She chewed slowly, as if analyzing the flavor, the texture, the potency, and Damien understood. She wasn't tasting food. She was testing it. She was measuring the concentration of his blood in the sauce, calculating dosage like a physician preparing medicine for a patient whose life depended on precision. The realization hit him with the force of a stake through the ribs. This wasn't theft. This was survival. And survival in his world, in the world that existed in the shadows between human understanding and supernatural reality, meant someone was dying. Someone she loved was dying, and she had stumbled, blind and desperate, into the only thing that could save them: vampire blood. Michelle sealed the container with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She wrapped it in paper towels, 2, 3 layers, then slipped it into a battered canvas bag that sat on the floor. Beside the bag, just visible in the candlelight, was a photograph. A small blonde girl with dark circles under her eyes, smiling bravely at the camera despite the hospital gown and IV line visible in the frame. Damien's predatory stillness shattered. His hand moved to the wall, steadying himself against a rush of emotion he hadn't felt in 3 centuries, not since watching his sister waste away from a Covenant-engineered plague while he stood helpless, his vampire blood unable to save her because he'd given it too late. He should confront Michelle. He should fire her. He should wipe her memory and salt the earth of this security breach. Instead, he watched her finish her ritual. The meticulous cleaning of the platter, the careful arrangement of the kitchen to erase all evidence of her presence, the checking of her cracked watch with mounting panic. She moved like a ghost, trying not to disturb the living world, trying not to be seen, trying not to exist beyond the absolute minimum necessary to survive another day. She grabbed her bag and hurried toward the service entrance, her footsteps nearly silent on the tile. The door clicked shut behind her. Damien stood alone in the vast kitchen, staring at the platter she'd cleaned until it gleamed. He could smell her fear still lingering in the air, could hear her heartbeat fading as she moved toward the parking area. He could let her go. He could pretend this never happened. But Damien Salvatore had spent 300 years hiding from the world, and in that time, he had forgotten what it felt like to care about anything beyond his own survival. Tonight, watching a desperate mother steal scraps of his blood to save her dying child, he remembered. He walked to the window and watched her battered silver Honda pull away from the estate, its taillights disappearing into the fog. Then he turned, climbed the stairs to his chambers, and retrieved the keys to his black Mercedes, the car he kept for situations that required discretion rather than speed. He would follow her. He would learn what threat had entered his carefully constructed isolation, and then he would decide whether Michelle Biden was a liability to be eliminated or something far more dangerous. A reason to stop merely existing and start living again. The hunt was on. The Mercedes purred to life with a sound like distant thunder, its engine a whisper of restrained power in the pre-dawn stillness. Damien sat behind the wheel, his hands resting lightly on the leather, and watched Michelle's taillights bleeding into the fog a quarter-mile ahead. He kept his distance, allowing 2 curves of the winding estate road to separate them before he followed. 3 centuries of survival had taught him patience. 3 centuries of loss had taught him that patience often came too late. He navigated the iron gates, which opened automatically at his approach, their ancient hinges groaning like old bones. The road beyond his property was narrow and poorly maintained, cutting through dense woodland that the city had long ago forgotten. Michelle's Honda struggled with the potholes, its worn shocks protesting audibly even from this distance. Damien's supernatural hearing caught every rattle, every squeal of metal on metal, every labored revolution of an engine held together by desperation and duct tape. She drove like someone who couldn't afford to be pulled over exactly the speed limit, turn signals flashing well in advance, a model of cautious respectability. But Damien could smell her fear, even through the closed windows of his own vehicle, could taste the adrenaline that spiked each time her brake lights flared. She was terrified. Not of being followed, she had no idea he was there, but of something else. Something waiting for her at the end of this journey. The forest gave way to sprawl as they crossed into the outer rim of the city. Strip malls with flickering neon signs. All-night diners where the desperate and the dangerous shared coffee and lies. Gas stations bright as operating theaters, their fluorescent glare making the shadows beyond seem even darker. Michelle navigated through it all with the mechanical precision of someone who had made this drive 1,000 times. Each landmark a station on a road to Calvary she walked every night. Damien maintained his distance, his preternatural senses making conventional surveillance techniques unnecessary. He didn't need to see her to track her. The unique signature of her heartbeat, slightly irregular, stressed, pumping blood that now carried trace amounts of his own essence, was a beacon in the darkness. She was marked, whether she knew it or not. The blood-infused food she'd been stealing had created a connection between them, a thread of supernatural resonance that pulled taut across the distance, separating predator from prey. Except she wasn't prey. That was the problem. Prey ran from predators. Prey prioritized self-preservation. But Michelle Biden was driving toward something, not away from it, clutching that canvas bag of stolen food like it contained the antidote to mortality itself. The neighborhoods deteriorated as they drove deeper into the city's forgotten margins. Boarded windows, graffiti spreading across brick facades like necrosis, cars on cinder blocks, their parts harvested long ago. Damien felt the familiar weight of human suffering pressing against his senses, the psychic residue of poverty, addiction, violence, all the small deaths that accumulated in places the world had decided weren't worth saving. Michelle turned into a trailer park that looked like it had given up trying to be anything other than a waiting room for the grave. Riverside Mobile Community. The sign proclaimed with letters missing. Damien pulled to the shoulder 100 yards back, killing his lights. He could see everything from here, his vision cutting through darkness as easily as daylight. The park was a grid of rusting metal boxes, most dark, some glowing with the blue flicker of televisions or the chemical glow of meth labs. Michelle's Honda coughed to a stop in front of a particularly dilapidated unit at the far end of the complex, near where the pavement gave way to marsh. She didn't get out immediately. She sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, her head bowed as if in prayer or defeat, Damien couldn't tell which. Then she straightened, grabbed the canvas bag, and opened the door. That's when they appeared. 3 figures emerged from the shadows between trailers with the coordinated precision of a pack surrounding wounded prey. Not supernatural, Damien would have sensed that, but trained. Military bearing, tactical spacing, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly how much force they could apply without breaking their target permanently. The leader was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered and granite-faced, wearing a dark jacket despite the mild night. Even from this distance, Damien could see the bulge of weapons beneath the fabric, and something else, a crucifix tattoo crawling up the man's neck, the ink mixed with silver to make it visible even in darkness. Covenant. The word materialized in Damien's mind with the weight of 4 centuries of accumulated hatred. The Covenant of the Sacred Hunt, the organization that had systematically exterminated his family, his clan, his entire bloodline, until he was the last ember of a dying fire. They hunted vampires, yes, but not out of righteousness or protection of humanity. They hunted for profit, harvesting supernatural blood and organs to create the very monsters they claimed to oppose. And now they were here, cornering his maid in a trailer park at 3 a.m. Michelle froze when she saw them, the canvas bag clutched to her chest. The leader commander something, Damien's memory supplied from intelligence reports he'd compiled over decades, stepped forward with the casual arrogance of someone holding all the cards. "You're late, Mrs. Biden," the man said, his voice carrying across the night air with parade ground clarity. 3 days late on your payment. That's unacceptable. Damien moved without conscious thought, leaving the Mercedes and flowing through the shadows between trailers like smoke. He stayed downwind, kept to the blind spots, his supernatural nature allowing him to approach within 20 feet without triggering any mortal awareness. He could hear everything now: heartbeats, breath, the creak of leather holsters, the electronic hum of weapons designed to kill things that shouldn't exist. "I have money," Michelle said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It's not all of it, but it's something. Please, just give me more time. I'm working extra shifts. I'll get the rest. The rest? The commander laughed, cold and mirthless. Mrs. Biden, you owe us $75,000. You paid us $200 last week. At this rate, your daughter will be dead before you clear 10% of the principal. Damien's hands clenched into fists. Daughter. The photograph he'd seen. The blood-infused food portioned out like medicine. Every piece of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The treatments, Michelle whispered. You said the treatments would help her. They are helping her. She's still alive, isn't she? The commander stepped closer, invading Michelle's space with practiced menace. But our sensors detected something interesting in her latest blood work. Contamination. Specifically, exposure to concentrated supernatural essence. His eyes narrowed. You've been supplementing our treatments, haven't you? Feeding her something you shouldn't have access to. Michelle's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. The commander grabbed her arm. You've found a vampire. You've been stealing its blood, and you're going to tell us where it is. Or we stop Sophia's treatments tonight. Damien had heard enough. He stepped out of the shadows, his glamour dropping, allowing his true nature to bleed through the mortal disguise. His eyes flashed silver in the darkness. His voice, when he spoke, carried 4 centuries of accumulated rage. She doesn't know where I am, Damien said softly. Because until this moment, I was a ghost in my own home. All 3 Covenant operatives spun toward him, weapons rising. But they were too slow. Humans always were. But now, Damien continued, moving faster than mortal eyes could follow, positioning himself between Michelle and the hunters. I'm standing right here. And if you ever threaten what's mine again, I'll show you exactly why your organization spent 300 years trying to exterminate my bloodline. The night exploded into violence, silver bullets and blessed steel. But Damien was already moving, already calculating, already choosing connection over survival for the first time in 3 centuries. And there would be no going back. The commander's name came to Damien in fragments of intelligence reports compiled over decades of paranoid vigilance. Tobias Creed, former Special Forces, recruited by the Covenant in 2003 after a tour in Afghanistan, where he'd encountered something in the mountains that the Pentagon had classified and buried. He specialized in extraction operations, capturing supernatural entities alive for the Covenant's research facilities. His success rate was 93%. His conscience was a withered, vestigial thing. Damien's revelation hung in the air between them like smoke. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The 3 hunters stared at him with expressions cycling through disbelief, recognition, and the cold professional calculation of predators who just realized their prey had teeth. Creed recovered first. His hand moved to the weapon at his hip, not drawing, not yet, but establishing presence. Salvatore, he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. We've been looking for you for a very long time. And yet you never found me, Damien replied, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that came from knowing exactly how much violence he could deliver before any of these humans could blink. Perhaps your organization isn't as competent as it believes. Stand down, Creed ordered his men without taking his eyes off Damien. The 2 flanking operatives, younger, harder, carrying modified assault rifles, that Damien's nose identified as loaded with silver-jacketed rounds, and sanctified ammunition adjusted their stance, but didn't lower their weapons. They were disciplined. They were trained. They were utterly insufficient. Michelle stood frozen between them, the canvas bag pressed against her chest like a shield that could protect her from this collision of worlds she didn't understand. Her heartbeat hammered against Damien's supernatural senses, terror, confusion, and underneath it all, a mother's desperate calculation. How do I survive this? How do I get back to Sophia? Mrs. Biden, Creed said, his tone shifting to something that might have passed for reasonableness in a different context. Step away from the vampire. Slowly. We're not here to hurt you. No, Damien interjected, allowing a fraction of his true nature to bleed through his civilized facade, his eyes brightening to liquid silver, his canines extending just enough to catch the ambient light. You're here to collect on a debt you manufactured. You infected her daughter with hemophagic cellular degradation, then sold her the only cure at prices designed to ensure she could never pay. Michelle's sharp intake of breath told Damien his deduction had struck true. Creed's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, not guilt, but annoyance at being exposed. That's a serious accusation, Creed said. Do you have proof? I've had 300 years to study your organization's methods, Commander. You create the disease, provide the cure, and maintain permanent leverage over anyone desperate enough to accept your terms. It's efficient, it's monstrous, and it's exactly the kind of operation the Covenant excels at. One of the younger operatives shifted his weight, finger moving fractionally closer to his trigger. Damien tracked the movement without appearing to notice, already calculating angles, trajectories, the precise amount of force required to disarm without killing. He wanted them alive. Dead men couldn't answer questions, and Damien had many questions about what the Covenant was doing in his city, targeting his staff, contaminating his carefully maintained isolation. "How much does she owe you?" Damien asked. 75,000, Creed replied, plus interest, plus penalties for late payment. And her daughter needs weekly treatments to survive? Bi-weekly, at 3,000 per session. Creed's smile was a razor slash across his weathered face. Though recently Mrs. Biden's been supplementing with stolen supernatural material, which is why we're having this conversation. Damien glanced at Michelle. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face, her body trembling with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying impossible weight for too long. She looked small, fragile, utterly human, and yet she'd been stealing from a vampire, however unknowingly, to save her child. The audacity was almost admirable. "I didn't know," Michelle whispered, her voice breaking. "I swear. I didn't know what was in the food. My boss throws away so much, and it seemed to help Sophia more than the hospital meals." The color came back to her cheeks. She could play for a few hours instead of just lying in bed. "I thought it was just better nutrition, organic ingredients or something." "You thought wrong," Creed interrupted. "You've been feeding your daughter vampire blood, diluted, uncontrolled, dangerous vampire blood. She could have transformed. She could have died. And you led us right to the source." The revelation crashed over Damien like a cold wave. This wasn't coincidence. This was a trap, carefully baited and patiently set. The Covenant had infected Sophia, sold Michelle the treatments at ruinous prices, and then waited for her desperation to lead her to exactly what they wanted. A vampire foolish enough to reveal himself. They'd been using the child as bait from the beginning. 48 hours, Creed said, addressing Michelle now. "You have 48 hours to bring Mr. Salvatore to our facility voluntarily. If you comply, we'll forgive your debt and provide Sophia with permanent treatment, a complete cure. If you refuse..." He let the threat hang unfinished in the air. "You'll take the child," Damien finished for him. "Use her as leverage to draw me out anyway. And when I come for her, and we both know I will, you'll have your extraction team waiting." Creed's smile widened. "You're smarter than the rest of your kind. Most of them are so arrogant they can't see the trap until it's already closed. But you've survived this long for a reason." He took a step back, gesturing for his men to lower their weapons. 48 hours, Mrs. Biden. The address will be sent to your phone. Come alone with the vampire, and everyone gets what they want." "And if we don't come?" Michelle asked, her voice steadier than Damien expected. "Then Sophia's next treatment is her last. And in approximately 72 hours, her bone marrow will have destroyed enough blood cells that her organs will begin shutting down. It will be painful, it will be prolonged, and it will be entirely preventable." Creed buttoned his jacket with deliberate care. "Choose wisely." The three hunters retreated to their black SUV with the coordinated precision of a military unit executing a planned withdrawal. The engine growled to life, headlights cutting through the fog, and then they were gone, leaving Damien and Michelle standing in the ruins of whatever fragile normalcy she'd been trying to maintain. Michelle turned to face him, and Damien saw the exact moment survival instinct overrode terror. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She met his inhuman gaze with the fierce, desperate courage of a mother who had already lost everything except the one thing that mattered. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is my daughter going to die?" "Yes," Damien said, "because lies serve no purpose now. Without proper treatment, she has days, maybe a week. And you can save her?" "I don't know," Damien admitted. "But I know the Covenant can't. Whatever they've been giving her is designed to maintain dependence, not cure. They need her sick. They need you desperate. They need me to find you." Michelle finished. Her laugh was bitter, broken. "I was bait. My daughter was bait. And I was too stupid to see it. You were a mother doing everything in her power to save her child. That's not stupidity. That's love." The words felt strange in Damien's mouth. He hadn't spoken about love in centuries, had convinced himself he'd forgotten what it meant. But standing here, watching this human woman hold herself together through sheer force of will. He remembered. Michelle looked down at the canvas bag still clutched in her hands. The food I've been stealing. It has your blood in it? A trace amount. My chef is traditional. He believes meals should carry the essence of those they serve. And that's why it helped Sophia? Your blood? Ancient vampire blood has regenerative properties. In controlled doses administered properly, it can counteract cellular degradation. Damien paused. But what you've been giving her is accidental, inconsistent. It's keeping her alive, but barely. She needs more. She needs you, Michelle interrupted. She looked up at him, and Damien saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the terrible mathematics of maternal desperation. If I bring you to the Covenant, they'll cure her, they'll kill me and harvest my blood. Then they'll use Sophia to create more victims, more leverage, more traps for other supernatural entities. Your daughter will live, but she'll be a slave to them forever. And if I don't bring you, then we find another way. Damien surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. But first, I need to see her. I need to assess how advanced the degradation is. A sound from Michelle's trailer cut him off a child's cough, wet and labored, the kind of sound that spoke of lungs fighting a losing battle against fluid and failing systems. Michelle's face went white. Sophia, she whispered, and then she was running, stumbling over broken pavement, the canvas bag forgotten in the dirt. Damien followed her into the darkness, toward the sound of dying, toward a choice that would shatter 3 centuries of careful isolation, toward the only thing that had ever made immortality feel like a curse worth breaking. The trailer door hung crooked on its hinges, the cheap aluminum frame warped by years of New England winters. Michelle fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly it took 3 attempts to work the lock. Damien hung back in the shadows, giving her the illusion of privacy while his supernatural senses catalogued every detail of the scene unfolding before him. Michelle pushed inside and immediately plastered on a smile so bright, so devastatingly false, that Damien felt something crack in his chest. He'd worn similar masks for centuries, the cordial nobleman, the reclusive eccentric, the man who was fine, always fine, even as loneliness hollowed him out from the inside. He recognized the performance because he'd perfected it himself. "I'm home, baby," Michelle called out, her voice steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "And you won't believe what I brought." Damien moved to the window, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. The interior of the trailer was a study in dignified poverty, everything threadbare but clean, organized with the desperate precision of someone trying to maintain control over a life spiraling into chaos. The furniture consisted of a pull-out couch covered in a faded quilt, a small table with mismatched chairs, and medical equipment that dominated the cramped space like an occupying army. IV stands, oxygen tanks, a portable monitoring system with leads snaking across the linoleum floor. The smell hit him even through the glass disinfectant trying to mask sickness. The metallic tang of blood and dying cells, the antiseptic sterility of hospitals transported into a home that should have smelled like cookies and laundry detergent and life. And there, on the pull-out couch, was Sophia. 8 years old, Michelle had said. But she looked younger, small for her age, in the way chronically ill children often were, their bodies consuming themselves to fuel the war raging inside. Her blonde hair, so like her mother's, hung limp around a face that was almost translucent in its paleness. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, bruises blooming purple and yellow along her arms where countless IV attempts had failed to find viable veins. She wore pink pajamas decorated with faded unicorns, and she was reading a picture book by flashlight, the beam trembling slightly with each labored breath. But her eyes were bright, intelligent, alive in a way the rest of her body wasn't. She looked up when Michelle entered, and her smile was genuine, unmarred by the weight of knowledge that she was dying. Children were resilient that way. Or perhaps she simply didn't understand that the exhaustion, the pain, the endless medical interventions weren't normal. Perhaps this was all she remembered of life. "Mama!" Sophia's voice was hoarse, strained. "Did you bring the special food?" "I did, sweetheart." Michelle set the canvas bag on the table, her hands steadier now that she had an audience to perform for. "The chef at my work. He's so generous. He made extra again. And he knows how much you love it." Damien watched Michelle's hands as she unpacked the plastic container, her movements automatic, practiced. This ritual had played out dozens of times, the careful portioning, the measured dilution, the mother's desperation disguised as a gift. She scooped white rice from a pot on the stove, arranged it on a chipped plate, then drizzled the blood-infused sauce over it in careful spirals. Just enough to help. Not enough to transform. A tightrope walk between salvation and damnation that Michelle didn't even know she was performing. "It smells good," Sophia said, struggling to sit up. Michelle rushed to help her, propping pillows behind the girl's back, adjusting the oxygen cannula in her nose. The casual intimacy of it, mother caring for child, child trusting mother, was almost painful to witness. "Slow bites, remember," Michelle instructed, handing Sophia the plate and a fork. "Let your tummy adjust." Sophia nodded solemnly and took a small bite. She closed her eyes, and Damien saw it happen, the subtle shift in her physiology as his blood, however diluted, entered her system. Color bloomed in her cheeks like watercolor on paper. Her breathing eased fractionally. The tremor in her hands steadied. It was temporary, Damien knew. A few hours of relief at most before her body resumed its inexorable march toward failure. But for those few hours, she would feel almost normal. "It makes my fingers tingle," Sophia said, flexing her small hands. "Like magic. Like vitamins." Michelle corrected gently, the lie coming easily now. "Very special vitamins that help you feel strong." Damien's hands clenched against the window frame. He could fix this. Not with diluted sauce scraped from dinner plates, but with proper transfusions, controlled doses, medical supervision. He had the resources, the knowledge, centuries of understanding vampire physiology and its interaction with human biology. He could save this child, but saving her meant exposing himself. It meant breaking 300 years of isolation. It meant becoming visible to the Covenant, to their hunters, to their extraction teams. It meant risking everything he'd built in the name of survival. Sophia ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Michelle sat beside her and narrated a story from the picture book. Damien recognized the performance, the animated voices, the gentle touch, the way Michelle made herself into entertainment and comfort and hope all at once. She was giving her daughter everything she had, pouring herself out like an offering to gods who'd stopped listening. 20 minutes later, Sophia's eyes began to droop. The plate was only half finished, but Michelle didn't push. She simply took it, set it aside, and helped Sophia lie back down. Within moments, the child was asleep, her breathing easier now, her face peaceful. The moment Sophia's eyes closed, Michelle's mask shattered. She stood there for a long moment, swaying, looking down at her sleeping daughter. Then, like a puppet with cut strings, she collapsed onto the floor beside the couch. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming, just down. A woman with nothing left. From a canvas bag shoved under the table, Michelle pulled out a coffee can. She pried off the plastic lid with trembling fingers and dumped its contents onto the linoleum. Crumpled bills, mostly 1s and 5s, a few 10s. She counted with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed this calculation too many times to hope for a different result. $127, she whispered to the empty room, to the medical equipment, to the gods who weren't listening. "I need 3,000 by Friday," she laughed, and it was the sound of something breaking. 3,000. I'm working the estate during the day, the diner at night, cleaning offices on weekends. 3 jobs, and I'm still $2,873 short. Damien's eyes drifted to the wall above the couch, where a single photograph hung in a cheap frame. It showed a younger Michelle, radiant and whole, standing beside a dark-haired man with kind eyes. Between them, held in the man's arms, was an infant Sophia, pink and healthy and new. It should have been a portrait of happiness, of a family with a future stretching bright before them, but someone had taken a knife to the man's face, slashing it out of the image, with violence that spoke of rage and grief. And there, barely visible in the corner of the photograph, clipped to the man's shirt pocket, was an ID badge. Damien's preternatural vision could make out the logo even at this distance, the Covenant's symbol, a crossed sword and crucifix. Joseph Biden, Michelle's dead husband. He'd worked for the organization, now hunting his widow and using his daughter as bait. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't random. The Covenant didn't accidentally infect children and then coincidentally hire their mothers to work at estates owned by vampires. This was orchestrated, calculated. They'd identified Damien years ago, planted Michelle in his household, engineered this entire scenario to draw him out, and he'd walked right into it. Damien should leave. Should erase Michelle's memories of tonight, disappear, relocate to another continent where the Covenant's reach was weaker. He had protocols for this escape plans refined over 3 centuries of paranoid preparation. He could be gone before dawn, leaving no trace except a generous severance check and a few strategic compulsions to smooth over the gaps in Michelle's memory. But then Sophia coughed in her sleep, a wet, labored sound, and Damien saw not this child but another, his sister, wasting away in their family manor, while he'd frantically searched for a cure that came too late. He'd been newly turned then, still learning what he was, still believing his vampire blood could save anyone he loved if he just gave enough of it. He'd been wrong. She'd died anyway, in his arms, while the Covenant had burned their home to ash around them. 300 years. 300 years of surviving, of hiding, of telling himself that isolation was strength and connection was weakness. 300 years of being already dead inside, going through the motions of immortality without any reason to justify the existence. And now here was Michelle Biden, sitting on the floor of a rotting trailer, counting money she didn't have, to save a daughter she couldn't save, stealing from a monster because monsters were the only thing left that might help. Here was Sophia, 8 years old and dying, reading picture books by flashlight to save electricity, asking if the special food was magic. Here was a choice: walk away and survive, or step forward and live. Damien's hand moved to the trailer door before his conscious mind registered the decision. He knocked 3 soft raps that wouldn't wake the child but would carry clearly to the woman inside. Michelle's head snapped up, terror flooding her face. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, useless against him, but the gesture was pure protective instinct, and moved toward the door. When she opened it and saw him standing there, silver eyes glowing softly in the darkness, she didn't scream. She simply said, "Are you here to kill us or save us?" "I haven't decided yet," Damien admitted. "May I come in?" Michelle stood aside, and for the first time in 3 centuries, Damien Salvatore willingly crossed a threshold into the light. Michelle arrived at Salvatore Hall at 7 the next morning, an hour early for her shift, her eyes hollow from a sleepless night spent watching Sophia breathe. She expected to find a termination notice, perhaps a security escort to ensure she left without incident. What she found instead was Damien Salvatore waiting in the kitchen, motionless as a statue, with her stolen plastic containers arranged on the marble counter like evidence at a crime scene. "Sit down, Mrs. Biden," he said without preamble. Michelle's legs locked. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to run, to get back to Sophia, to put distance between herself and this creature who'd invaded her life with impossible revelations. But running wouldn't save her daughter. Running wouldn't erase the debt. Running wouldn't undo the Covenant's 48-hour ultimatum that was already burning down to ash. "I can explain," she started, but Damien raised one hand. "You've been poisoning your daughter with vampire blood." The words hit like a physical blow. Michelle's vision tunneled, darkness creeping in at the edges. She turned toward the door, some animal part of her brain, convinced that if she could just reach her car, just get back to the trailer, somehow everything would be fine. Damien moved with inhuman speed, his body suddenly blocking the exit without appearing to cross the intervening space. Michelle slammed into what felt like a wall of marble, stumbled backward, and would have fallen if his hand hadn't shot out to steady her. "I'm not going to hurt you," Damien said, and something in his voice, something weary and ancient and utterly sincere, cut through Michelle's panic. "I'm going to help you. You're a... Michelle couldn't make her mouth form the word. "Vampire." "Yes." Damien released her arm and stepped back, giving her space. "Though I prefer to think of myself as a very old man with particular dietary requirements and an unfortunate sensitivity to sunlight." Michelle's laugh came out strangled, hysterical. "This isn't real. I'm having a breakdown. The stress, the debt, I'm hallucinating. You're not." Damien's glamour dropped like a curtain falling away. His eyes blazed pure silver, pupils elongating into something feline and predatory. His canines extended, sharp and gleaming, designed for puncturing flesh and drawing blood. The air around him seemed to darken, shadows gathering as if he were a black hole pulling in light itself. Michelle's knees buckled. The world tilted sideways, and then there was nothing. She woke on a leather sofa in what appeared to be a library, surrounded by books that smelled of centuries. Damien sat across from her in a wing-backed chair, his glamour restored, looking perfectly human except for the preternatural stillness with which he held himself. No breathing, no fidgeting, just absolute, corpse-like immobility. "How long was I out?" Michelle asked, her voice hoarse. 3 minutes. "I caught you before you hit the floor." Damien gestured to a glass of water on the side table. Drink! You're dehydrated. Michelle's hands shook as she reached for the glass. She drained it in 4 long swallows, buying time to force her mind into some semblance of order. Vampires were real. Her employer was a vampire. She'd been feeding her daughter vampire blood. The Covenant. The Covenant, she whispered. They knew. They've always known what you are. They've suspected. Now they're certain. Damien leaned forward slightly, his silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. Your daughter has hemophagic cellular degradation. It's a designer disease engineered, not natural. Her bone marrow is destroying blood cells faster than it can produce them. Eventually, her organs will fail from oxygen deprivation. The medical term is cellular cascade failure. The practical term is slow death. Michelle's throat closed. She'd known. Sophia was sick, desperately sick. But hearing it laid out with clinical precision made it unbearably real. The treatments the Covenant has been selling you are diluted vampire blood, mixed with suppressants, Damien continued. Just enough to keep her alive, never enough to cure her. They need her sick, Mrs. Biden. They need you desperate. Because desperate people make excellent bait. Bait for what? For me. Damien stood and walked to a mahogany desk, retrieving a tablet. He handed it to Michelle. On the screen were files, dense medical reports, encrypted communications, photographs of people she didn't recognize. I spent last night hacking the Covenant's network. It's easier than you'd think when you have 4 centuries of experience and unlimited computing resources. Michelle scrolled through the documents, her hands growing steadier as horror replaced panic. There were dozens of cases identical to Sophia's children of Covenant researchers, infected with various designer diseases, parents paying exorbitant prices for treatments that never quite worked. And there, buried in a personnel file, was a photograph that made her breath stop. Joseph. Her husband. Younger, smiling, wearing a white lab coat with the Covenant insignia. He was a biochemist, Damien said quietly, recruited out of Johns Hopkins in 2014 to study vampire physiology. He was brilliant, by all accounts, and he discovered something the Covenant wanted buried. Michelle's finger traced her husband's face on the screen. What did he discover? That the diseases his employers were treating weren't natural. That the Covenant was deliberately infecting children to maintain demand for supernatural cures they controlled. That the entire research division was a front for medical extortion. Damien paused. He tried to resign. He took evidence to the FBI. And 2 weeks later, his car went off a bridge during a rainstorm. The words hung in the air like smoke. Michelle had mourned Joseph for 6 years, believing it was a tragic accident. Senseless bad luck on a slick road. The truth was so much worse. They killed him, she said flatly. And then they infected Sophia. Insurance. If you ever asked questions, if you ever threatened to expose them, they had leverage. A sick child is a powerful motivator for silence. Damien's expression was carved from stone. And eventually, they knew you'd become desperate enough to do anything to save her, including working for a very rich, very reclusive employer who might have access to alternative medicine. They planted me here. Michelle's voice was hollow. They gave me this job. They've been watching me steal from you. They've been tracking the blood signature in Sophia's system, waiting for it to strengthen, to become concentrated enough to identify its source, waiting for you to lead them to me. Michelle set the tablet down with trembling hands. So what happens now? They gave me 48 hours. If I don't bring you to them, they'll take Sophia. Then we don't give them the chance. Damien returned to his chair, his movements precise, controlled. I'm offering you a deal, Mrs. Biden. You and your daughter move into the protected wing of this estate. I'll provide Sophia with proper transfusions of my blood under medical supervision. Dr. Helena Frost, one of my oldest associates, will monitor her treatment. In exchange, you help me gather evidence to destroy the Covenant's research division. You were married to one of their scientists. You know how they operate. You can identify vulnerabilities I can't see. You want to use us as bait. I want to use them as bait, Damien corrected. They think they've trapped me. They think I'm going to walk into their facility to save a dying child. Instead, we're going to dismantle their operation from the inside, while Sophia gets the treatment she actually needs. Michelle stared at him, searching for the deception, the angle, the hidden cost. Why would you help us? We're nothing to you. Liabilities, security risks. Damien was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, His voice was raw with an emotion Michelle suspected he hadn't allowed himself to feel in centuries. Because the Covenant killed everyone I ever loved. Because I've been dead inside for 300 years, going through the motions of immortality without any reason to justify the existence. Because when I look at your daughter, I see my sister, wasting away while I was powerless to save her. His silver eyes met hers. Because you're not nothing, Michelle. You're a mother who's been stealing from a monster to save her child. That's not weakness. That's the most human thing I've witnessed in 3 centuries. Tears spilled down Michelle's cheeks, hot and sudden. Will this save her? The blood transfusions? I don't know, Damien admitted. The disease is advanced, but doing nothing will definitely kill her, and I'd rather die trying to save her than spend another 300 years wondering if I could have made a difference. Michelle closed her eyes, seeing Sophia's pale face, her brave smile, the way she read picture books by flashlight to save electricity, seeing Joseph's face slashed out of their family photograph, seeing the last 6 years of her life revealed as an elaborate trap designed to catch a monster who turned out to be more human than the people hunting him. When do we move in? She whispered. Tonight. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided. That evening, as twilight bled across the Boston skyline, Michelle's battered Honda pulled through the iron gates of Salvatore Hall for the last time. In the back seat, wrapped in blankets, Sophia slept fitfully, her breathing labored but steady. Beside Michelle sat 2 suitcases containing everything they owned that mattered. Clothes, medications, the slashed photograph, and a children's book about a girl who befriended a dragon. Damien met them at the entrance, his expression unreadable in the gathering dark. He lifted Sophia from the car with a gentleness that contradicted everything Michelle had been taught about vampires, carrying her through the massive doors into a home that had been a tomb for centuries. Welcome to Salvatore Hall, he said quietly. You're safe here. Michelle followed him into the darkness, choosing to believe in monsters because the humans had proven far worse. Behind them, the iron gates swung closed with a sound like a coffin sealing, and the hunt began in earnest. Sophia's room looked like something from a fairy tale, all cream, silk, and gold filigree, with a canopy bed draped in gossamer curtains and windows that overlooked gardens where moonlight turned everything to silver. Michelle stood in the doorway watching Dr. Helena Frost prepare the first transfusion with clinical efficiency, and tried not to think about how her daughter's entire life could fit into 2 suitcases, while this single room contained more luxury than they'd seen in 6 years. The initial dose will be small, Dr. Frost said, her voice carrying the crisp precision of someone who'd practiced medicine longer than penicillin had existed. She looked 40, elegant in tailored gray, but her eyes held centuries. Will increase gradually as her body acclimates. There may be discomfort, tingling, mild fever. It's normal. Sophia, small and pale against the mountain of pillows, watched the IV line with the resignation of a child who'd spent half her life tethered to medical equipment. Will it hurt? Less than what you're used to, Damien said from the corner where he'd been standing motionless as furniture. He moved forward, his presence somehow less threatening in the warm glow of the bedroom lamps. May I show you something? While Dr. Frost works? Sophia glanced at Michelle, who nodded. Damien extended his hand, pale, long-fingered, steady, and Sophia took it with the fearless trust of children who hadn't yet learned that monsters came in beautiful packages. He led her to the window and pointed at the night sky. Do you see that constellation? The one that looks like a hunter with a belt? Orion, Sophia said. We learned about it in school. I knew him, Damien said casually, and Michelle's breath caught. Well, not him exactly, but the man the Greeks named him after. Terrible hunter, actually. Couldn't track a elephant in fresh snow, but he told wonderful stories. Sophia's eyes widened. You're that old? I'm exactly that old. Damien's smile was gentle, almost human. Which means I've read every story ever written and learned to play every instrument ever invented. Would you like to see my library? It has books in languages that don't exist anymore. For the first time in months, Michelle watched her daughter's face light with something other than pain. Can we go now? After your treatment, I promise. He squeezed her hand and stepped back, allowing Dr. Frost to insert the IV with practiced ease. The blood flowed through the tube dark, rich, carrying the weight of centuries. Sophia watched it enter her veins, and Michelle saw the moment it took effect. Color blooming in her daughter's cheeks like spring after endless winter, the tremor in her small hands steadying, her breathing deepening from the shallow gasps of the dying to something approaching normal. Mom, Sophia whispered, wonder in her voice. I can feel my heartbeat. It doesn't hurt anymore. Michelle pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from sobbing. By week 2, Sophia was running. Actually running, her blonde hair streaming behind her, as she chased butterflies through gardens that had forgotten what children's laughter sounded like. Michelle watched from the veranda where she'd been reviewing Covenant tactical manuals with Gregor, who turned out to be less ghoul chef and more former Special Forces operator with culinary training, and felt something crack open in her chest. She looks healthy, Gregor observed, his scarred face softening. Dr. Frost says her blood count is nearly normal. Nearly, Michelle repeated, the word carrying all her fear. Nearly wasn't cured. Nearly wasn't safe. That night, she found Damien in the library, surrounded by documents pulled from Covenant servers, personnel files, research notes, the digital breadcrumbs of conspiracy. He didn't look up when she entered. His preternatural focus locked on the screen. Joseph was going to expose them, Michelle said quietly, standing in the doorway. The night before he died, he told me he had evidence. He said we might have to move, change our names, start over. I thought he was being paranoid. He was being hunted. Damien finally looked up, his silver eyes reflecting laptop light. There's a termination order in his file, approved by Commander Creed himself. Michelle walked to the sofa and sat, suddenly exhausted by the weight of 6 years of lies. He used to have nightmares. He'd wake up screaming about children in cages, experiments, things I thought were just stress dreams. They weren't, were they? No. Damien closed the laptop. The Covenant's research division runs human trials on subjects they consider expendable. Children of researchers who know too much, supernatural entities they've captured, anyone they can justify as necessary sacrifice for the greater good. The greater good of profit, Michelle said bitterly. Always. Damien moved to the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from him. I'm sorry you lost him. I'm sorry you lost everyone. Michelle turned to face him, studying the ancient weariness etched into features that would never age. How do you survive it? Watching everyone die? Poorly, Damien admitted. I stopped trying to connect, stopped caring, convinced myself that isolation was strength. His laugh was hollow. Then a desperate woman started stealing my leftovers, and I remembered what it felt like to be human. Michelle didn't remember closing the distance between them. She only knew that one moment she was sitting alone, and the next she was leaning against his shoulder, exhaustion dragging her down into darkness. The last thing she registered before sleep claimed her was Damien's arm coming up tentatively to support her, and the whisper of his voice. I won't let them hurt you. He didn't move for 6 hours, terrified that waking her would break whatever spell allowed a human to trust a monster enough to sleep in his presence. Week 3 arrived with the subtlety of an execution. Dr. Frost delivered her verdict in the library, her ageless face grave. The transfusions are failing. Sophia's body is adapting, requiring increasingly higher doses to maintain stability. At this rate, she'll develop tolerance within a month, and then she dies, Michelle finished. Unless we perform the blood bond. Dr. Frost glanced at Damien. A complete DNA alteration. It's permanent, dangerous, and will transform her into a Dhampir. Meaning? Michelle asked. Meaning she'll be neither fully human nor fully vampire, Damien said. She'll age normally until her mid-20s, then stop. She'll need blood monthly instead of daily. She'll have enhanced strength, speed, senses, and she'll be able to walk in sunlight without burning. What's the survival rate? Dr. Frost's silence was answer enough. Finally, 75%. If the donor is ancient and strong. Michelle looked at Damien. My blood gives her the best chance. He met her gaze steadily. I've done this before. For my sister. She died anyway, but Sophia's younger, stronger. She might. Don't, Michelle interrupted. Don't give me hope wrapped in might. Then I'll give you certainty. If we do nothing, she dies. If we try this, she has a chance. Those are your options. That night, Michelle sat with Sophia in the princess bedroom, holding her daughter's small hand. Mr. Damien can make you better. Really better. But it means you'll change. You'll be part vampire. Like him. Sophia considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd spent too much time contemplating mortality. Will I be a monster? No, baby. Never. Mom, Mr. Damien isn't a monster. Monsters are people who hurt others because they like it. He's just different. Sophia squeezed Michelle's hand. Will it hurt? Yes. Worse than now? Michelle's throat closed. I don't know. Then let's do it. I'm tired of hurting all the time. The chapel in Salvatore Hall's east wing hadn't been used in 200 years. Damien had ordered it restored for the ritual candles burning in iron sconces. The altar cleared of dust, stained glass windows depicting martyrs' deaths casting colored shadows across ancient stone. Dr. Frost prepared the equipment with ritualistic precision. IV lines, monitoring equipment, bags of supplemental blood in case things went catastrophically wrong. Damien lay on a medical cot, already pale, already preparing himself for what came next. Sophia climbed onto the adjacent cot, small and brave, while Michelle held her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Be brave, baby, Michelle whispered. Be strong. Dr. Frost connected the lines. Blood flowed from Damien to Sophia in a dark river, faster than the previous transfusions, aggressive and overwhelming. Sophia's eyes widened, her back arching as foreign cells invaded her system, rewriting her DNA one chromosome at a time. Then she screamed. Michelle lunged forward, trying to disconnect the line, maternal instinct overriding everything else. Damien's hand shot out, weak but unyielding, gripping her wrist. Trust me, he rasped. Let it finish. Sophia convulsed, her small body rejecting and accepting the change simultaneously. Her veins darkened, visible beneath translucent skin, her heartbeat thundering so loud it echoed off chapel walls. Damien grew paler, his centuries-old blood pouring out, pushing himself toward the edge, where death waited for even immortals. Then Sophia's heart stopped. Michelle's scream tore through the chapel, raw and primal. Dr. Frost moved with supernatural speed, beginning compressions. But Michelle saw the truth in her eyes. They were losing her. More, Damien whispered, barely conscious. Give her more. You'll die, Dr. Frost snapped. Give her more. Dr. Frost adjusted the flow. Blood poured from Damien in a final, desperate flood, his eyes rolling back, his ancient heart stuttering. And then, Sophia gasped. Her eyes opened, and they were silver. Pure, glowing silver. Mom, she breathed, her voice carrying strange harmonics. I can hear everything, the stone remembering when it was mountain, the candles singing as they burn. The moon, Mom, the moon is singing. She sat up, and Michelle saw it. The bruises gone, color restored, strength radiating from her small frame like heat from a forge. Her daughter, remade. Her daughter, saved. Damien collapsed, unconscious. Dr. Frost immediately began transfusions to replace what he'd given, but his pulse was thread-thin, his breathing imperceptible. For 3 days, he didn't wake. Michelle kept vigil in his chambers, watching his chest for the subtle rise and fall that marked him as still tethered to existence. Sophia visited every evening, her silver eyes bright with concern, her new strength allowing her to actually climb stairs without collapsing. On the 3rd night, Damien's eyes opened. Michelle was there, had been there for 72 hours straight, and when she saw him conscious, something inside her broke open. She kissed him. Not gratitude, not relief, something deeper, more terrifying. Thank you, she whispered against his cold lips. Thank you for giving me my daughter back. Damien's hand came up to cup her face, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he allowed himself to feel something other than survival. Thank you for reminding me why immortality might actually be worth living. The moment shattered when alarms shrieked through the mansion. Gregor's voice crackled over the intercom. Breach at the front gate. Message delivered by drone. They found it on the steps. A tablet showing Commander Creed's face. We know what you did, Salvatore. The girl is Covenant property. We're coming to collect her and you. Surrender within 24 hours, or we burn your sanctuary to ash. Damien, still weak, still recovering, looked at the tablet with eyes that had watched empires fall. Let them come. I've been hiding for 300 years. I'm done running. Michelle took his hand. We fight together. From behind them, Sophia's voice rang out, clear and strong and absolutely fearless. They made me sick. They killed my dad. When do we make them pay? The 3 of them stood in the moonlight streaming through the iron gates. No longer monster and victims, but something far more dangerous. A family with nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The Covenant had created this war. Now they would learn what happened when you backed monsters into corners and gave them reasons to bite back. The end.